All right, so we are ready to begin organizing the note cards. So basically what you were supposed to do prior to today was you were supposed to get your sources approved by me with your final source sheet. So obviously you've read through your sources, kind of have an idea of, what they're about, what each one is talking about, maybe which side each one's on, whether they're neutral, more on a pro or con side, depending on which topic you've chosen. So I want to show you two different examples of what you can do with your note cards at this point. So on the slideshow right here, if you look at this picture, there are 5 sources that the student used. The primary was an interview source with SeaWorld because their topic was whales in captivity. They had 2 secondary online sources, non-prints, which were articles about whales in captivity. They had the documentary Blackfish, which would be the secondary other source, and then they had the secondary book source, which was the print source about whales or killer whales in captivity. Okay, so what they did was they took, like you were supposed to, quotes from each source and write them on separate note cards. And so for now, this person basically has their cards and pieces of evidence separated into each source. So each source has its own pile. Well, unfortunately, with a paper, you don't just write 5 paragraphs this way. What you need to do is actually combine your evidence from each source into different topics. So this person decided, after going through all of their note cards, that in order to combine these, what she was going to do was separate them into 3 piles. Okay, so this first one is information about orcas or killer whales, and so these are some things that she found from that. Now, one thing that sticks out to me right away is if you notice, all 3 of these cards are actually coming from the same exact source. And that's not your goal. You're not going back to this and just naming a pile, but rather you need to compile all of your cards into 2 or 3 different piles. So right away, this is kind of a red flag to me. There's ways around it though, so I'll talk about that. From there, the second pile this person came up with was how great being kept in captivity is at SeaWorld. Now, another red flag that I see is great is in quotations here. So in other words, this person was kind of making fun or making an argument or claim against them. Now, if this was an argumentative essay, that'd be great, but since this is an informational research paper, you don't want to, pick sides on this. Instead, you want to inform. So if there is actual evidence that's coming from different sources that's talking about the good in captivity, that's fine, but I would just leave the quotes out of there. So over here we've got, a bunch of different examples of why it is, good for whales in captivity. Again, though, as I was looking through these, I noticed that all of the cards under this heading is only coming from 2 different sources. And just like in this other slide, where all of these note cards are coming from the same source, you're going to want to switch that up. So 2, yes, is better than 1, but still, you have 5 sources, and your goal is to compile them all so you're using all of them. So then the third pile this student came up with here is the bad in captivity. So we have total information about orcas, the good in captivity, and the bad in captivity. And once again, these 2 piles are coming from 2 different sources, and again, they should be using all 5, but that's how this person organized it. So basically what I would then encourage the student to do is to just look back at everything and see if there's any other way to organize it rather than good and bad, but perhaps something along the lines of, what happens to whales in captivity, because then you might get the good and the bad, but you can kind of compile them into, 1 or 2 topics where all of the sources are used. Now here's another example of what a student did. So basically, same thing, they separated their note cards into 3 different piles, but they actually did this as they were writing their note cards. So what they did was they read through all 5 of their sources, decided on 3 topics. So in this case, this student is focusing on the Sprinkles Bakery. And so one pile is about the history of Sprinkles Bakery. The other pile is how Sprinkles changed the baking industry. And the third pile is how Sprinkles is still successful today. So with that said, if you look within the piles, you'll notice that we have New York Times, we have Nightline, we have Interview, we have all kinds of different sources, and probably all 5 sources were used that kind of helped this person group these into these 3 categories. And the colors, they just really help the student organize a little better because then they know that each color pertains to a different paragraph. Okay, so this would actually be a lot easier and more useful since all topics are used. And you can still approach it this way. You can do it without the colors, but again, you're going to want to vary your sources. The one thing that is important, though, about this with the information about orcas is just the idea that this essay, it does require a introduction slide. So information about orcas or like information about sprinkles, if that was a topic here, is actually helpful because you can use those facts within your intro paragraph. Okay, so basically your goal now here is to take your own note cards and separate them into 2 or 3 piles since this is a 2 or 3 body paragraph informational essay. When you're finished with that, you can then move on to the next step, but please keep some of my tips in mind, especially concerning this same source per pile type thing, because that's going to actually have to be redone later on if that's what you follow. Okay, so after you're finished with that, move on to goal number 2. Thanks.